This time I'm going to talk about specifically some of the results we've had from surveys over the past few years of homeowner level perceptions and risk reduction behavior in a number of cities. So just as an introduction to the presentation, I'll briefly talk about homeowner level urban flood mitigation. We've heard most of this stuff already today, so I'll be very quick. Some of the measures that municipalities and insurers are using to encourage lot level mitigation, again, heard most of this stuff in today. And then I'll go over briefly some of the results that have been found from perception studies, which have been conducted for about 50 years in North America, and then study results and implications from my own research. So lot level measures, again, just quickly, things that you can do at the lot level. And I'm going to sort of differentiate physical or structural things you can do to your house or your property and behavioral things you can do. So for your house, to reduce infiltration, you can seal cracks in your walls, foundation walls and your floors, disconnect your sump pump, or sorry, foundation drain, many times a day. Backdoor valves, maintaining. Some of the things seem to be relatively simple, like just maintaining plumbing measures. For example, maintaining eaves troughs. If your eaves troughs get plugged up, water can pour over the side of them, close to your foundation. May be a factor in flooding. Downspout disconnection in the splash pad, as we've heard many times. Inspecting and repairing laterals, and things like lock rating and maintaining swales on your yard if they're there, and capping that background rating. So for the behavioral measures, there's a number of things people can do that are essentially cost-free. So simply, reporting flooding events they've experienced through municipality can help municipalities identify risk areas. They can talk to their insurers about coverage. They'll show in a few minutes. People are pretty unsure about insurance coverage. Relatively simple things, not pouring fast oils and grease down your drains, as we saw from Loris's presentation. Sewer systems can get plugged up with grease, laterals can get plugged up with grease. Maintaining your lock grading, your plumbing, don't build your fence in your swale or your deck in your swale or what have you. And if you're going to do mitigation actions, make sure you get all your proper investigations and permits and inspections. We've heard of cases, for example, I think from Hamilton, where somebody had a backwater valve installed backwards. It doesn't do a lot there. So make sure you have proper inspections. And something that seemed relatively simple, but is difficult for people to do, leave your basement unfinished. If you do have a lot of problems, that's usually the last resort, it seems. So as we heard again today, many measures are being applied to encourage homeowner action. Public meetings associated with environmental assessment, there are lots of environmental assessments. Sometimes they can use public meetings as an opportunity to inform homeowners about risk reduction. Meetings that aren't associated with environmental assessments just focus on affected neighborhoods. Meetings focused on plumbing measures, so the City of Edmonton has had meetings in affected neighborhoods in the past on backwater valves and on sump pumps, just to inform people what they do and what they are. Mass media, brochures, handbooks, websites, mailings, etc. And insurance providers are becoming somewhat involved in this as well, as I'll explain in a minute. And a popular thing that we often ask about, subsidy programs. So quite a few municipalities across Canada. This is not a complete list, but it gives an indication of giving it quite a large number of municipalities. Well, not every municipality, obviously, but quite a few people are doing it. As we heard before, maximum grants are around $3,000 often. Sometimes it's only backwater valve, sometimes it's a range of options, but it seems to be generally $3,000. And often it's a proportion of cost, not 100%. Sometimes it's 100%, sometimes it's a portion. For example, Toronto, the total grant is $3,200, but for backwater valves and sumps, it's 80%, $2,800. And Winnipeg recently started up a program in partnership with the province, 60% up to $3,000. And there's quite a range we found by looking at these programs, especially for backwater valves, anywhere from $500 in Niagara Falls to $1,250 in Toronto. These programs are generally focused strongly on sewer backup risk reduction as opposed to infiltration or overnight flow. And there's sort of a range of people where these programs are available to, as we heard from Galen and others. There's different ways of administering these programs. Some cities make them available to all homeowners in the city, regardless of their history. or identified risk of flooding. Some focus on risk areas only, and some focus just on historically flooded homes. There's also some differences in sort of the requirements. Whether or not they can be enforced is a question, but they're good ideas. So one of the things I'll show later on in the presentation is some uncertainty about what is actually in your basement. So Niagara Falls and some other municipalities, if you get funding from the program, they tell you to inform anybody who buys your house or whatever that it's in there and how to maintain it. And some municipalities require municipally sponsored plumbing investigations. So when you actually get into these houses, it can be pretty complicated. The diagrams you saw earlier are pretty ideal situations. So it's good to get some advice, professional advice. If you're going to do it, make sure you're getting the right measures installed. Another way, aside from subsidy programs, is just using standards, bylaws, or mandatory installations. Lock rating is something that's factored into new development now. Maybe it wasn't so much 50, 60 years ago, but all new subdivisions usually have good lock rating. Infiltration and inflow reduction is usually required. So as we heard, many municipalities require no downspout connections in new development, and foundation drains as well. It seems to be a pretty wide range of years where municipalities started saying that you can put foundation drains into the sanitary sewer. For example, Durham has required this since '83, Peterborough since '91, and Sault Ste. Marie since as early as 1968, and some more recently. But it's just a means of ensuring that this doesn't occur. And also quite a few municipalities, especially it seems in the west, are requiring backwater valves in new development. And one of the things we've found, actually talking to guys from the company and a few municipalities around Canada, is that there seems to be a difference in the way the code section that relates to backwater valves is interpreted. So in the National Plumbing Code, and this wording seems to be applied almost in all provinces. It says where a building, drain, or branch may be subject to backflow, a gate valve or backwater valve shall be installed. And there seems to be a difference in the interpretation of that first may, with some municipalities saying if you're, for example, putting infill development in an old area that's had problems in the past, those are the homes that may be subject to backflow, where others say that it's any home that's connected to the system, given a severe enough rainfall event. And for insurance companies, again, I mentioned this earlier, but they're becoming involved in education materials, incentivizing mitigation. We got some data from, or collected a bunch of endorsements through CompuQuote, and we found that usually it's sumps and backwater valves that are mentioned as opposed to, say, downspout disconnections or other measures. It's usually sumps and backwater valves. And the incentives take many forms. It can affect availability, as I mentioned before. It can affect caps, and in some cases premiums, which may be hard for homeowners to understand. If you say that your insurance company is going to incentivize your backwater valve, they may expect a premium reduction rather than an increase in their cap. And also, it seems most common way of identifying what's going on for new business and for homes that haven't had problems in the past are questionnaires, through backup questionnaires. So you ask the homeowner if you have these measures in your house. Okay, so for hazard perception research for natural hazards has been going on since the 1960s in North America. It started in the U.S. with flood perception research. And throughout that time, 1960s to present, pretty much across North America, and it really depends on flood histories in communities. But there's been quite a few common findings. So people tend to deny or denigrate hazard probabilities. It's difficult for them to interpret low probability events. There's sort of perception that it won't happen to them. There's misinterpretation of extreme event statistics that's been found quite a bit. For example, if you have a flood and you hear in the newspaper that it was a 1 in 100 year event, you think you're safe for another 99 years. That was identified pretty early on. Some people call it the gambler's fallacy. And these are common findings for flood, it seems, in many cases. There's also been, as we heard this morning, it's difficult to get people to do things to reduce risk, and that's not just early flooding. It's been identified in other studies in other parts of North America. You know, because of these low probability events, because of the interpretation of the statistics, what's going on here? People find sort of the upfront investment somewhat difficult to justify. You know, spending that $3,000 on a backward valve if you think you're not going to be flooded for the rest of your life. That's difficult for them to understand. The moral hazard has been identified in some cases, so the expectation of insurance coverage or public relief payouts would reduce willingness to do something. And there's also been a pretty strong reliance on governments to do risk reduction rather than homeowners. So for riverine flooding, people have tended to prefer structural adjustments like dams and levees rather than you know, retrofitting homes or what have you. So it's not just urban flooding; it's other types of flooding. And there's, you know, again, as we heard this morning, transfer of blame regardless of severity of events. The expectation that the infrastructure will protect you. I'll talk about that in a minute. But there's also pretty strong correlations between disaster experience and investment in risk reduction, and that's pretty much found in all the studies. If you've had damages in the past, you're far more likely to do something about it. But a caveat to that is the window of opportunity, so people think about it quite a bit for a while, and then it kind of drops off. Actually, we did a study of Kelowna wildfire a few years ago, and they thought it was about a 2-year window of opportunity when political and public interest was pretty high in reducing risk. So some of the results from our studies, we did a study in Peterborough in 2005 using self-administered survey approach. Actually, it was for my master's. It's getting pretty old, so I'm not going to talk too much about the Peterborough results. But it does give an indication of sort of perception 1 year after a very large event. We had a large event in 2004. We did a phone survey in Toronto and Edmonton in 2007. And then just this past summer, which I'll talk about mostly, the Sherwood Forest study, as Kyle mentioned. Kyle helped us out quite with this. We used self-administered, so we hired 2 students from Western, and they walked around the neighborhood in the evenings and weekends and dropped off surveys. And we tried to get people to fill out the surveys at the door rather than just leaving them so they could, you know, had questions about it. Most people chose to mail it back. But we got a really good response rate in Sherwood Forest, about 33%, which that's pretty good. So some of the results from Sherwood Forest, you know, we asked people, have you ever had flooding in the past? And as Kyle mentioned, this area has had some issues in the past, as recently as 2009. And about 31% of the respondents said that they had some flooding in the past. And when you break that down into sewage and clean water, or a mix of both, most of it seems to be clean water flooding. So we didn't ask if you had overnight flooding or sewer backup. We asked if the water was clean or was it sewage, how did it come in your house, did it come in the floor drain, did it come in the window, etc. Expecting that people wouldn't really know what the terms meant. So again, most people with clean water flooding. And one of the things we found was, which is probably assumed, is that the majority of clean water flooding was infiltration flooding. So people reported the water came in there, cracks in the walls, or the joint between the foundation wall and the basement floor. So 32% of those people that had clean water flooding said that was the cause, as opposed to say coming in through the window or door, which is about 20%, which is what we usually think about for overland flooding. We asked if people had reported their events to the city, and people who experienced sewage flooding, about 56% of those people reported it to the city. So there's about 42% of people who had sewage flooding in the past who didn't report it to the city. And for clean water flooding, the results were much lower. 13% of people reporting it to the city, and 87% not reporting it. And to get at some of the perceived responsibilities, the results from Peterborough, just confirming what the municipal people had said this morning, that most of the blame is placed on municipalities. So in this study, we surveyed people, public residents, as well as what we call experts, so people from the municipality, people from the province, and so on. And so we asked to assign a certain percentage of responsibility on a few different entities. Well, I just got 4 of them here, but the municipality, forces beyond human control, so the heavy rainfall, property owners or the conservation authority, and by far residents place the blame on municipalities as opposed to property owners or forces beyond human control, or the heavy rainfall event, whereas experts were a little more distributed. And similar results were for overland flooding as for sewer backup. In Toronto, again, similar distributions. People putting most of the blame on municipalities as opposed to homeowners. We also asked people in London if they had made an insurance claim for their most recent event. So for sewage flooding, people had sewage flooding, about 52% again, so about the same proportion of people reporting it to the city made a claim. About 44% of people didn't make a claim. So that kind of creates issues surrounding identification of who's had problems in the past. Clean water flooding, obviously, most people didn't try to make a claim. The city wouldn't be covered. And we also asked people, so this is getting into the knowledge of insurance coverage. Do you have insurance coverage for sewer backup? So this is in London. And 45% of people said they didn't know if they had coverage for sewer backup, which is interesting because this area has had problems in the past. And well, regardless of who said they didn't, that's a pretty large proportion of people who didn't know. And when you break that down into people with clean water flooding, people with sewage flooding, people with clean water flooding, about 45% didn't know. Again, it wouldn't have been insured, so it's not too surprising. But still, a quarter of people with sewage flooding still hadn't checked their policy to see if they had that sewer backup coverage. And this is similar in Edmonton and Toronto. These are people with sewer backup in the past. 33% in Edmonton, 30% in Toronto. So relatively the same proportions of people didn't know if they had sewer backup coverage. And I just wanted to relate it to this graph. Actually, before I was at ICLR, they had done a survey Canada-wide of 2,500 respondents asking what's covered under a typical homeowner policy, so homeowners across Canada. And you know, there's a list of hazards, frequency of yes responses. So for fire and theft, of course, most people assume that was covered, and they're right. But for flooding, coastal flooding, overland flooding, about 70% of people thought that they were insured for these hazards, and they're not. And another misperception, quite a few people not knowing they're covered for wildfire and response and so on. There seems to be quite a bit of lack of certainty about insurance coverage. So next, I just want to identify a couple of things regarding knowledge of city programs. As Kyle mentioned, Sherwood Forest had been targeted with quite a bit of information and different ways of getting at people. In 2009, as Kyle said, there was a survey, letter of explanation, brochure sent out to everybody in the neighborhood, and there was some additional communications inviting people to a public meeting, notifying of the downspout extension pilot program. Kyle mentioned that as well, just a few neighborhoods in the area. So we asked people, have you ever looked for information on basement flooding? If you did, where did you get it from? So the first couple of bars on the left there, we asked, have you ever read, received, or downloaded any City of London information on basement flooding? So have you looked at anything from the City of London on basement flooding? Have you ever received anything? And people who had flooding in the past, about 42% of them said they had. And in reality, every home received a letter and information package. And about 29% of people who had no flood reported having read something. And for the website, about 18% of people chose to go look at the website. The city has a website. 18% of people with flooding. About 50% of people reported having gone to a public meeting, and that might be even high. And very few people have looked at other organization material, so they mostly looked at the city stuff if they had looked at something. But quite a few people still had heard of the grant program, at least 39% of people said the grant program for flood reduction measures. 39% of people with flooding and 22% of people with no flooding. But on the positive side, quite a few people were interested in getting more information. 67% of people with flooding, 56% with no flooding. And sort of the lack of knowledge of city programs, again, is something that we found before. In Edmonton and Toronto, we asked a very general question: is your city doing anything to reduce risk? And these are all people that sewer back in the past. And still quite a few people didn't know what was going on. They said no. Of course, both cities were doing quite a bit to reduce risk, but they just hadn't heard of it. And so of those people that indicated that they wanted more information, we asked, how would you like to receive that information? And by far, people wanted it from the city as opposed to their insurer, which we thought was kind of interesting. We asked them about pamphlets, a handbook, websites, etc. The most popular ones are pamphlets, made for your home website, and a handbook. But we found, well, actually, one of the interesting things is 45% of people said they'd be interested in having a website, and there is a website, but only 18% of people have actually gone to it. So they probably just didn't know about it. And no respondents identified wanting information from their insurer alone. So anybody who wanted information was either from the city alone or from the city and their insurer, not just their insurer. So a couple of notes on survey methods. We put a description and pictures of backwater valves. We have pictures of downspouts, connected and disconnected downspouts. And we just want to make sure people knew what we're talking about. This is a backwater valve, this is where you find it. This is what some pump looks like. And we still found quite a bit of uncertainty about what was in their basement. 32% of people couldn't tell us whether or not they had a backwater valve. It's pretty hard to spot in your basement. And if you didn't have one, it might be hard to find. But still, that's a pretty high proportion of people in a risk neighborhood who couldn't tell us. And most people didn't, of course. And about 20 respondents, we asked if you had a backwater valve, did you install it yourself? Was it installed when you moved in, or were you responsible for its installation? About 20 respondents said that they had installed it themselves, so they were responsible for installation. So pretty few had actually gone out and done it themselves. With the subsystem, far lower levels of uncertainty. Only 5% of people didn't know if they had a sump in their basement, which is, again, something you'd expect. You can see it and hear it. But again, and actually this yes, having a sump in your basement is probably a pretty high estimation. It's probably lower. But again, only 18% or 18 people were personally responsible for the installation of the sump. And downspout connection, as Kyle mentioned, there's no downspouts in the system. Most people said they didn't have one. 4% of people said they did. It might be a misperception or something that looks like a connection, where it's maybe going through a pipe and then going somewhere else in the wall. But there's still, again, less uncertainty about this adjustment. So some of the implications. Again, this is all the London results are in that paper that was given to you in your package. It was actually the first time we put it out. So there's low awareness of insurance coverage identified in most of the studies, and as well as a previous survey that ICLR had done. So that's an issue. And there seemed to be relatively low awareness of mitigation measures, especially in London. We were talking about backwater valves. We thought that this kind of brings up some questions about the reliability of insurance sewer backup questionnaires. If you're asking if people have backwater valves, are they reporting that they are and they don't? Or are they not reporting it because they don't know? And also, we didn't ask about maintenance requirements, but you can make the assumption that if a lot of people didn't know if they had a backwater valve in their basement, they would also not know how to maintain it if they had one. And another question is, are home buyers aware of mitigation measures? So if you're buying a home with these things in it, do you know that it's in your home and how to maintain it? Few chose to install plumbing measures on their own. As I said before, only 20 people put a backwater valve in, 18 people with a sump. So we thought this sort of exemplified the importance of mandatory measures. So interpreting the building code or putting in bylaws or standards to require them in new homes sort of exemplifies that, the importance of those approaches. Also given the cost of putting in retrofitting and the seeming lack of willingness for people to retrofit. And there seemed to be relatively low rates of people reporting events in the city. So this may create issues with identifying people or areas that have been prone to flooding. So we found this in London with the survey results, but it's also been reported in Hamilton and other cities, questioning whether people actually report these events. And in Edmonton, actually, we got data from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. The number of insurance claims for sewer backup was about 9,500, but only 4,000 reports to the city of sewer backup. So there's a big disconnect there. There's fears about reporting it to your insurer, to your municipality for home value reductions or insurance coverage issues. Another thing to bring up was the relative frequency of infiltration flooding. And most of these programs, education materials, are focused on sewer backup. So maybe there's some opportunities there to inform and encourage risk reduction of infiltration flooding as well. And as in the open-ended response, we've got quite a few concerns about sump pumps. I think that was mentioned earlier today as well. People fearing, if they put a sump pump in their basement, will it fail, or will they get flood? And so this kind of creates issues surrounding consistency of information. If you're trying to get people to put sump pumps in as a flood reduction measure, they think it's going to cause a flood. It is a big disconnect for them. And there was limited awareness of city flood reduction programs, despite the work that the City of London had done to mail things out, surveys and public meetings and so on. There was still quite a bit of unawareness of city programs. And I think that, or we thought that this probably indicates a pretty strong role for insurers, or the possibility of a role for insurers. So although the results of the study indicated that people strongly preferred information from their municipality, you still want to use as many conduits as possible for information distribution, and you want to make sure that information is consistent. So we think that in some cases, rather than insurers developing their own materials, maybe they can serve better as a conduit for materials developed by cities already that's relevant to the local neighborhood or relevant to the city. And perhaps there's some opportunities for insurers and brokers to work with municipalities to get the right materials and get them sent out. So in conclusion, homeowner level actions, as we heard today, an important part of flood mitigation. There's many strategies employed, but it's a pretty big challenge to affect behavior, especially for retrofits. And again, for retrofits, it really exemplifies, the results really exemplify the importance of mandatory measures, getting these things in homes when they're new. And another thing I wanted to bring up was insurance incentives. So we want to make sure that, this is a really good step. Everybody thinks it's a great step for insurers to do incentives, but we want to make sure that they're working with municipalities to get the right things installed, make sure that some pumps are in where they should be, and so on. Maybe more, if you put a backwater valve, in many cases you should also have your downspout disconnected so that you don't get self-flooding. So we want to make sure that we're doing recommending the right measures. So that's it, and thanks very much. So I think we have time. Sure. I think we have 10 minutes for questions. Yeah.
So, question. Great presentation and really interesting results. So, drawing on the survey results, has ICLR with IBC thought about developing pre-packaged PSAs that could be aired nationally with a tagline making reference to the city's website, sort of as a variation on the theme, getting the message out via the television media, but the tagline then referring them to where information in their local municipality can be had specific to the incentive programs that may be available. Great,
that's a good idea. And I was hoping at the insurer panel later today that I could talk about these things. We have worked with IBC to develop YouTube videos and things like that. So we have a lot of videos, but the big thing to do is to tie in with local municipalities, as you say. So hopefully we can do that. We think it's a good idea. Maybe we can start with Toronto and work out from there. Yep.
In Chicago, they use flow restrictors on the sewers, on the streets.
Yeah.
And they've developed the expectation that some streets will have water on them for a while.
Great.
Also, Chicago is looking at the possibility of engaging with the equivalent of the Weather Network to do some of these sort of public service announcements. So connecting with the public to say, well, here's weather and it's coming, and this is the sort of thing that's relevant. So feeding the media with information, because sometimes they have gaps in their programming and they could use that sort of thing.
Sure, yeah, makes sense. Well, I'm hoping that we can talk more about this at the panel. Really get an opportunity to get maybe some partnerships going with insurers. I'll end it there. So thanks very much, Nick.